Hey there, Augie. How's it going?
I'm well, Todd. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. And I appreciate you taking the time to have this curious dialogue with me. We had a few conversations last year. I got introduced to you by a mutual friend, Robert. And after I had the opportunity to converse with you, I came away realizing that there were new dimensions of empathy and compassion that I hadn't quite considered yet in the work that I do in counseling and music and mindfulness for the community. And I felt really inspired. And so I knew in the back of my mind that when I got to a point where I was ready to release these dialogues, that you would be somebody at the top of my list that I wanted to circle back to hear your story and explore the all the implications of what you've experienced and what you care about. And so we're going to get to that in a moment, but I know you've stepped into a new role recently, and I was hoping we could maybe start by having you share a little bit about what you're doing currently, and and maybe how the economic crisis and the impact of all that is affecting your work right now.
So, my new role that I started at the first of the year, I'm the director of housing and employment at an organization called Above and Beyond Family Recovery Center, located in the city of Chicago on Sacramento and Lake Street. They are an outpatient substance abuse recovery center, and I had actually been going in there the last couple of years doing life skill programming once a week for part of the population that's in there. And one thing led to another that I was asked to expand the work to help with job readiness. And then they asked if I would take over the housing piece. And it's something, frankly, Todd, I didn't have any experience with, but they assured me they'd provide me support so I could learn and figure out how to get it done. And just as I'm getting started, this COVID crisis hits, and homelessness right now is at an acute situation, not just in the city, but throughout the entire country. So it's been a learn on the fly type situation. It's been a real challenge, and I don't think that anybody at this moment has answers as to how to handle everything that's going on.
Yeah, I've heard that maybe now as many as 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment. Do you know if we're getting any data back yet on homelessness? Now, I imagine there's some moratoriums in place, so this is probably going to be delayed, but certainly people are concerned about that in Chicago.
So that's a great question. There's two sides to the coin. The one side is that the traditional shelters, the emergency shelters for somebody that literally has no place to lay their head tonight, they're by and large not taking in any new individuals for fear that if they come in and they're carrying the virus, that they could infect the entire population of everybody that's already in there. And that's certainly understandable, right? That if they let somebody in and they have 100 people and they're in tight quarters, that it could turn into 100 infected people. So for those that don't have a place to stay, it's a real challenge. And I'm sure as we go through our dialogue, that we'll talk about some of the work that I'm doing in that area. On the other side of the coin, those that have places, that have apartments, and yes, 30 million, 30 plus million Americans, it's a real issue. I have people come in every day and they are not getting responses with respect to their unemployment filing. So they have no money coming in. They're now falling behind in their rent, about to move into a second month behind. And so with that situation, the governor has in Illinois stayed evictions. So even though they're not paying their rent, they're not in any imminent danger of being put out on the street today. The problem that we see, obviously, is that once we start to return to whatever the new normal is going to be, there's going to be a lot of people that are 30, 60, 90 days behind in their rent. And since they haven't been having a steady flow of income coming in, they really don't, a lot of people won't have the ability to make that rent current. So there's probably going to be a very serious wave of homelessness that will occur as we get into the summer.
So is that how a moratorium works? It's essentially delaying your payments, but it's
Yeah, I
not
mean,
giving you, I mean, it's not like once things open back up, you start where you were in March. There's going to be a much higher tab, right?
sure. I mean, I don't know how it's all going to work out, but if you stop and think about it, if you're the landlord of a building and you have a mortgage on your building and you have property taxes on your building and I'm your tenant, and because I lost my job suddenly, I can't pay my rent, even though you can't put me out, your bills are still mounting. You still have to pay your property taxes and your mortgage and so on and so forth. So, in order for you to come out of this thing in one piece, it's going to require that I honor the lease that I signed and make all of those, in a 1 year lease, all 12 of those payments. And the fact that I'm 2 payments behind, the moratorium just means that you can't evict me at this point in time. It doesn't mean that I'm off the hook for paying that rent.
So, Augie, it almost sounds to me like some of these moratoriums is really just like delaying the inevitable for some people. And when it's all said and done, people weren't evicted during the crisis, but they're still going to be on the hook for these payments. And we have no idea what normal is going to look like you said. So I think this is a real concern. It's a real problem. I mean, I guess it's important that they're even using that language of moratoriums, but then how does it land for you, this extension, at least here in Illinois, of most of the restrictions? There have been some amendments to what we can and can't do, but for the most part, we're going to be sheltering in place at least through May 30th here in Illinois. What do you expect? What else do you expect from that extension from the
I
governor?
expect much of the same, Todd. I think that the shelters, as long as the shelter in place order stands, I think the shelters are going to continue not to have their doors open, um, so that individuals that don't have a place to stay for whatever reason are going to have a very difficult time finding a place to stay. I know in Chicago, and this is, I think, a good example, that there were four, the last I heard, there were four of the larger YMCAs that agreed to allow their facilities to be used as a shelter. And because of the good thing was because of what the knowledge they had about social distancing, when they set up as shelters, meaning moving beds in, cots and what have you, they spaced everything out to provide some of that to people who are provided with masks and gloves and hand sanitizer, those type of things. So, that's an example of a short-term thing, because the reality is that some of these YMCA's, that the beds were filled within a matter of a couple of days. So they might have had 200-300 beds that were filled almost immediately.
Mm. Okay, well, we're in for quite a ride then. This is uh, this is hard to make sense of, Augie, because you have this public health and economic health balance, and they're not completely separate, obviously, but we're getting hit hard here in Illinois. I mean, there's a lot of cases. I think I saw there's over 30,000 cases in Illinois, confirmed cases of COVID-19. And I remember earlier in the year when Italy only had 12,000 total confirmed cases, and the world news was reporting that Italy's way of life is threatened with 12,000 cases. And now our state alone has almost three times that. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's hard
and
to,
we haven't. I'm sorry, Todd, but
no,
I heard the governor say the other day we haven't peaked yet.
right.
We're not expected to actually peak until the middle of May. So we still have some really horrific numbers we're going to be facing with respect to the number of confirmed cases and the number of deaths. We're going to look at some really, really horrible numbers over the next, what is it, almost 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks. And then the hope is we will have peaked. I mean, there's no certainty to that, but the hope is then we'll start to see a decline in those numbers. And what I read was, according to the guidelines, I think the CDC guidelines, there's got to be 14 consecutive days of a decreasing amount of confirmed cases before a state should consider opening up to become more functional. And so if that middle of May peak doesn't occur and it runs later into May, then that I think almost certainly pushes the stay in shelter order sometime into June.
Yeah. So where are these people going to go who are already homeless and can't get into a shelter? What
So
options do they
interest
have?
so interestingly, the last week I through Above and Beyond, we applied for a emergency housing support grant, and we were allocated a certain amount of money. And I went out and found a hotel that was willing to negotiate a rate for rooms because the story is that hotel rooms right now, by and large, are empty. People are traveling, and so I was able to negotiate a very reasonable rate for rooms. I found a local business, which I was really proud of. It was a woman that has a catering business. Her business had dried up. She's been doing this a long time. So we engaged her to provide meals to those that were getting housed in the hotel. And that's really what's going on right now is that we're helping people to find housing in hotels, but there's a limited number of people we can work with. It's just based on the size of the grant. And the part of the challenge, Todd, is that we don't know what the end date is. So if I knew that somebody was going to be in a hotel room for 30 days, that becomes a fixed cost that I can manage to. But what if it's 60 days? What if it's 90 days? And so in order to try to make the grant money do what it's supposed to do, it's very difficult to forecast. So that's one answer right now is to provide, the state is providing funding that we can do emergency things using hotels. I think the YMCA pitching in the way they have shows how nonprofits can work in order to convert their facilities to allow for people to have a safe place to stay and 3 meals a day and the ability to protect themselves.
Augie, this is pretty different work altogether from what your original training was in. And now you told me a little bit about your experience before getting into community service. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your story and how you got into this new direction in life?
No, I don't mind at all. In fact, it's something that
Because there's more to the work than your current role. It's really important.
so my background is I grew up in Chicago, and I like to say that I came from a solid middle class family. I had 2 terrific parents, and they taught my sister and I certainly right from wrong. And after I graduated college, I got into the financial services world, and I was young. I was probably 24, and I opened my own financial planning firm. And I operated that for successfully for about 14, 15 years. But in the last couple of years, I got involved with the wrong people, and I made some horrible choices and some bad decisions. Things that even today, 20 years later, I can't reconcile with who I was or who I thought I was. And for that, I went to federal prison for almost 13 years. And so I never imagined what my career would look like, or the way it's turned out while I was, starting to think about coming home. And I actually arranged a job in the prison visiting room. I came back to Chicago. I did all my time in Minnesota, 2 different prisons in Minnesota. But um, I met somebody in the visiting room that went to the same high school I did, Marist High School on the south side, and we started talking. And at this point, I was about a year from leaving, and he asked me what I was going to do, and I told him I had been in the community outreach program for 9 years. So I was going into high schools and colleges and businesses and leadership groups, and basically just telling my story, the mistakes I made, and some of the transferable lessons about my unethical behavior. And so he hired me to do training and development for his corporate clients. And so I started almost immediately after coming back to the halfway house in Chicago. And within a couple of months, he and his father wanted to meet me, and we went out for lunch together. And his father who sadly just passed away over the last 6 months, but a man named Tom Owens, who really in the nonprofit world in Chicago was kind of legendary. He founded the CARA program, which is a big workforce development program that's been around almost 30 years. And he asked me a bunch, I'll never forget this. He said, "Can I help you? May I help you?" I said, "I'd be honored." And so he introduced me by email to Sheriff Todd. And so they invited me to come in and talk about the courses that I was teaching while I was away. I developed these courses about reentry, but they were really for me to figure out what I was going to do to reenter, and the challenges that I thought I was going to face and some plans to move forward. And so I went into Cook County, and before the meeting even ended, the Dr. Gubser, who's in charge of programming, said, "Will you help us? Will you come in and do some of this for us? And we don't have anything like this." And then she went on to say, "But we don't have any money to pay for it." And so the gentleman who had hired me was kind enough to say that he can come and do it on company time, so he'll be being paid for what he's doing. And so I started to go into Cook County, and frankly, it just took off from there. I mean, it literally, I now go into Cook County, King County, Kendall County jails. I work with probation departments. I work with halfway houses, and I provide life skill and employment readiness programming, reentry programming. And that's how I started to do my work at Above and Beyond, and which then morphed into doing the housing piece. And the good part about that from me, as far as feeling active and doing things, is that the jails now, there's nobody being permitted in, no outsiders permitted in. So the jail work that I was doing, which really is 3-4 days a week, that's closed right now. I mean, I talked to they contact me, and as soon as this opens up, but nobody knows when that's going to be, we'll resume what we were doing. But in the meantime, I feel like I'm contributing in some way by this housing piece, because it's fundamentally important. I mean, my eyes have really been opened, Todd, since I started to do the housing just at the beginning of the year. People that they sleep on the train, they sleep on the bus, they sleep on a bench. I mean, it's things that frankly, before I went through my experience, I never really thought about. I mean, I thought about it in a way to say that being homeless would be terrible. It is terrible, but to actually see how it impacts people. If you don't have stable housing, you can't really get a stable job. And if you don't have a stable job, you really can't get stable housing. So they call it the economic empowerment model. And both of those things have to come together. And that's what we work with people on is housing and employment. So even if we can get them into some form of transitional housing, while we help them find employment, the ultimate path then is that they get their own apartment, that they can afford, that, they choose whatever apartment they want, and they pay their bills and live their life like they want to live their life. And so that's really how my career has progressed. And I'll conclude by saying this, I never thought I would do something like this. It just never crossed my mind. But now that I'm doing it, I can't imagine ever doing anything else. I mean, I really believe this is what I should be doing.
Well, did it take such a hard lesson to bring you fully into the light of your purpose? I mean, of course, you would never want to go through something like that, but how do you make sense of it now?
It did. It did. I was, I had somehow my career, when I started my career way back in my 20s, I was about serving the client.
Hmm.
And at some point, and I can't tell you, I certainly can't tell you why, because I can't explain it to myself. And I can generally tell you when, but at some point, it became about making money and not serving the client. It was just about chasing the dollar. And the reality is that had this not occurred, that where I was
Were you having
incarcerated,
a lot of success before
yes,
that?
yes,
Okay. Would
and
you be
and that's
surprised? Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was going to say that's the crazy part is it became about chasing the dollar, but it's not that I didn't have a nice lifestyle, a roof over my head, a car in the driveway. It was really just the challenge of making money for the sake of making money. And that's where I really got on the wrong path. And So without this lesson, I'm convinced that I would have stayed on that path for the rest of my life and just to see how much money I could make just for the sport of
Mhm.
making money. And now I know that I'll never make the income that I once had uh, before the even before the criminal activity. But I have a whole different level of enthusiasm. I don't struggle to go to work. I mean, I still go into above and beyond right now. I put in a half a day where we close at 1 o'clock, but there are people come in every day with needs for either housing or employment or both. And I don't struggle with the motivation to go in and do that because it's something I really believe I should be doing. And it's not tied to some amount on a paycheck.
Now, is part of that, Augie, being in a situation like being in prisons where suddenly what's most essential in life starts to become clear? Because I'm kind of hearing some interesting things from people who are sheltered in the pandemic. Some people have said they felt like they're in prison. Of course, it's not the same thing, right? But I read this report that in China, as they're coming as they're closer to the other side of this, that there's a massive spike in marriage applications and applications for divorce. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that things become clear when when you get things so down to the minimum, like why we're here, and that nothing's guaranteed. Like, a chunk of your life that we might have said is the prime of your life could only be spent in this very limited way. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, what would sustain me? Like, I guess, some kind of purpose, right? They say if there's a why, you can endure anyhow.
You know, there you just said a lot. I mean, very
There's
powerful.
no question in that, I
No,
guess, because
very
it's a lot of
powerful stuff,
insights.
right? That resonates with me because yes, it having I didn't have nothing. I had clothes on my back when I was incarcerated. They fed us 3 meals a day. I had essential health care as needed. So I don't want to make it sound like it was some barbaric situation. But the reality is that, I was stripped down to having essentially nothing. And
Right.
that's part of one of the barriers I talk about with employers upon reentry. You know, I remember I'll share a real quick story. When I first got back to Chicago, I was staying in the halfway house, and my second night there. Now, I had not been in a store in almost 15 years, and so they took us in this little van. There were probably 8 of us that had just returned to Chicago to a Target downtown, a Target store. And so I walked inside the Target store and I was overwhelmed. I walked to the aisle to buy some essentials like deodorant. Well, I used to do for all that time, I did my shopping on a piece of paper. There were two choices of deodorant. There was two toothpaste choices. And I was overwhelmed, but not just with the selection. I couldn't get past the prices because I went away in 2005. My mind was stuck on 2005 prices. I remember I wanted to get one of those coffee cups that you for when you're in the car so it doesn't spill. I think like a Contigo or something. And they pointed me to the aisle and they were $22. I could I couldn't imagine spending $22 for a coffee. And so a lot of what we think, it rocks our foundation of what we fundamentally think or believe. And so as a result of that, we feel lost. I felt lost that I don't have that foundation to really know what's going on. So with respect to, what we're talking about here, I mean, yes, I was stripped down to a point that I value things that I took for granted. I don't value anymore. One of my favorite times of the day is that we take our little dog for a walk every day about 5:30. I just love walking around the streets of the neighborhood. I mean, for me, that's great. And so, so I can relate now. I can relate to the people that I work with because I'm part of that population. And so these are stories that I can share when I go into the jails or I work with people that are in halfway houses and talk about, hey, here's the barriers that I have encountered. You may or may not encounter them, but if you do, don't feel alone in that, because I think a lot of us go through the same thing.
Augie, you might be surprised to know, well, I do a lot of study of heuristics, cognitive distortions. And something interesting that I've come across is that as income increases, compassion seems to decrease. So I think people can enter into the work that you were doing with the best intentions, but there is studies of the vagus nerve in the body and its activation in response to other people's suffering. And as you bring in subjects with higher and higher incomes, the vagus nerve activation starts to diminish. So there's something about being around more money, being more successful, that continuously disconnects people. Now, it doesn't have to happen that way, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I think hearing your experience and learning this research about the way the mind works in psychology, I just don't think there's enough training for the kind of pitfalls you could encounter in terms of deviating from one's ethical center or losing one's moral compass, let's say. But anyways, that's what you're doing now. You're trying to help people see that they don't have to be stuck in a certain way of crime, or whatever mistake that people have made doesn't have to be the end of their story. Now, I think it's pretty amazing that you had some kind of social awakening, that like I could be really helpful to the community. And not just, you didn't want to just go right back to the work you were doing. I mean, when it came to the end of your time, you got offered this, or you got introduced to these new ideas of what you could do for other people who are vulnerable. And it wasn't like, no, 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 I gotta get back to making money. It was really like, I gotta help people. So to me, that, I mean, that's a sign that of rehabilitation, whatever rehabilitation actually means. It sounds like you achieved it, and you believe that other people can achieve it. And that's what it motivates you to keep coming back to these spaces where people are in some of the darkest times of their life, and you're trying to show them that there's something more on the other side.
And because I believe there is, I believe there is, right? I have the privilege to speak to groups quite often, especially employers, through like chambers of commerce and what have you, because I carry the flag for hiring formerly incarcerated people, people that have fallen down, they have some dings in their background, could be substance abuse and what have you. And so when I talk to employers, that's what I like to talk about, is that it's really just about providing an opportunity, to allow people to get back on their feet. But there's obviously more to it. One of the things that we do is we provide mentoring and peer support for those that are re-entering as they go through challenges, that they can sit in a circle with their peers who have shared experience, but maybe a little further down the path. They can say, I went through that too. What you're experiencing is normal. You're doing great. And give that sort of reinforcement. I think that I didn't realize how much my story connected with the audience until I really started to do this, to go into the jails. And certainly I developed and taught more than 100 classes over the time I was away. But when I would go in and the, I would, I always get a kick out of the first session with a group, because I walk in a Cook County jail the first time, and I wear a collared shirt, no tie, and a sport jacket or a suit. And I walk and I start to talk. And I'm sure these guys are sitting there when I first walk in the room and think, who is this guy and what's he possibly going to tell me? And then I just start by talking about, hey, here's where I work and here's what I do. And then I go into, and here's why I'm doing this. I start with my background, and I can tell you, and this is just a blessing for me. But in almost every situation, the number of people in the second session is larger than the first session, because
Seriously.
guys go back into the pods or into the tiers, and they say, hey, this guy came in, and he's done this. He was locked up for almost 13 years, and now he's out doing this. And there's more people that come in, and so I know that it's not me.
And I
It's
was going to ask you that. I was going
it's
to ask, is it resonating?
it's the hope. It's I mean, I had a sheriff tell me that what I do is I bring hope in with me because, what I talk about gets people to see that um, there certainly is a pathway forward, but we don't want to kid ourselves and say that it's easy because it
Right.
is not. And so, a lot of times people that haven't lived it oversimplify it. Well, if we can get everybody a job when they come out, they'll be fine. No, there's a lot more to that. There's damaged relationships with family and friends that have to be mended. There's fitting back into the social fabric where I'm not used to, unfortunately, when we're away, when I was away, you know, people talk different. They get lazy in the way they express their thoughts. They become vulgar in just the way that they speak. And the type of thing that you don't want to bring back with you because you're not going to fit in with it. And so there's a lot of that type of thing that has to go on in order to feel almost like at one point you felt. So for me, I've been out, I'll be 3 years in July, and I'm still not feeling comfortable in society. I still don't feel comfortable.
Well,
And
society has changed so much since you left, right?
there's no question.
I mean, the
Um,
world is so different. Social media didn't exist when
no,
you went to prison.
I had never, when I got out, I had never seen a smartphone. Actually, I mean, I've seen them, a picture of them, but I had never seen one. And so the first time I actually saw the capabilities of it. I mean, I got in the car to drive back, and my wife handed me, she's playing with her phone, and she hands it to me, and it's two of our closest friends on FaceTime, and I was absolutely overwhelmed. It was like I joke and say it was like being an episode of the Jetsons. I had no idea that because you can hear about technology, but when it's in the
Right.
palm of your hand, it was in many ways overwhelming, and I still struggle with that stuff a lot. And
Okay.
it's just I can only come up to speed so much, a little bit
Right.
at a time.
Did you ever see Shawshank Redemption?
I did.
Do you
I,
remember when the older inmate Brooks is released after like 30 years or
yeah,
something?
yeah,
And he says the world got itself in such a big hurry.
yeah.
Does it feel like life is so much faster than you remember
You know, Boy, you asked some really good questions. So
it?
I don't know that I would say faster, right?
Maybe
But
busier or something.
it feels more disconnected, more individualized.
Hmm.
I don't feel, and I can just go based on my memory from prior to 2005 all the way into my youth. But I don't feel a sense of community. I don't feel like people talk to each other. I don't feel like you see your neighbor out front and you know what they do for a living, and you ask them how their wife is doing by her first name, and I don't feel any of that. I think that a lot of it has been driven to using technology. I mean, text messaging, people will text message sometimes more than they'll actually get on the phone and speak. And so for me, an old school type person, that's a real adjustment. And I don't know that it's necessarily an advance. I think speaking face to face, I don't think that in my, again, old school way of seeing things, I don't think there's going to be a substitute for that.
Hmm.
So if I could, some of the programs that we're doing
Hmm.
inside the jails and prisons, we have been converting to be on a computer tablet, because inside jails and prisons now they're providing modified tablets. There's no internet access or what have you, but for education purposes. So we've put our material onto the workbook, and then I've been doing videos in Naperville Public TV to put together these comprehensive programs for people that I can't be in front of face to face. But one of my real concerns, because we were just getting ready to roll this out when COVID hit, so we will roll it out at some point this summer, I believe. But one of my real concerns is, will the message carry the same way working off of video as it does when I'm face to face? Because the reality of it is, it's the same material, it's the same presentation. The only thing that's different is that you're seeing it on a piece of equipment in your hand, as opposed to somebody standing in front of the room able to interact with you. So one of the thoughts I have is this really going to have the impact that I'm hoping it will?
Did you start mentoring while you were still incarcerated?
Yes. Yes. So I was involved for about 10 years. I was on the suicide uh, watch prevention cadre. And so that's how it started. Because there's some men when they come in, they really struggle and really struggle. And so based upon a lot of things, part of it was based upon the fact that I had a long sentence and based upon the fact that I had at some point served a lot of time. I would mentor them and let them know you'll get through this. I mean, let's talk about how you're going to go about getting to the finish line, being the best self you can be to move forward. And so I did a lot of mentoring over the years. And I'll say that I did mentoring because when I came in, there were others that were kind enough to commit their time to help mentor me to understand how to go about my business.
So you probably got exposed and close to people of all different walks of life, whereas maybe in your life before this stage, your circle was probably maybe a lot, I don't know, a lot different, right? Your circle of friends, your circle of clients, and so on. Did that sort of change your perspective about humanity and our interconnectedness, just seeing that people came from all different points to this same place, that now, they made a mistake, or they're incarcerated?
Absolutely. Absolutely, without question. And I will say this without hesitation. It's made me a better person. So I have lived with, uh, spent time with, gotten to know, made friends with people of all different races and walks of life and backgrounds from different parts of the country. And so I have, compared to the perspective I had before I went away, I feel like I can relate to and get along with anybody because of that experience that I had. I mean, if I stop and look at it over the years, I was with thousands of men, just people coming in, people going out, thousands of men from all over with different backgrounds, um, from inner city to the very affluent and everywhere in between. And so I feel confident in my ability to be able to relate to anybody, regardless of where they're at.
So why isn't there a program like you've created? Why isn't there that kind of curriculum already available to inmates to help them be ready for release and transition back to society?
I think the sad reality is that that's not how prisons are designed. I don't know how to run a prison, but my lived experience tells me how not to run one, right? My thought is that um, the they used to say and still do that prisons really what they do is they warehouse human beings, and so they put TVs in the TV rooms so people can be occupied. They've got plenty of card tables, games of dominoes. They feed us, anytime that they want to do something, they feed us, pieces of pie, large amounts of sugar, that type of thing. But to actually put a program in place to prepare people to be released, there really isn't anything like that available. And so, from that standpoint, if you don't make it your business to figure out what your plans are, there's not going to be any help with that. And so that's really what I focus on, is to how to put a plan in place that you can walk away with feeling some degree of, I don't want to use the word confidence, but at least direction, that this is what I'm going to do. I was, in all the time I was away, every 6 months I would meet with my case manager. And so, say 25, 30 times I met with a case manager. I had several case managers over the years, but not once did they talk to me about different programs, fully funded employment training programs that when I get out, I can go to at no cost to get a 12-week program to become a carpenter or a welder or a mechanic or whatever it might be. or that I could enroll in school and that financial aid was available to me. I'd have to apply for it, but it's available to me. Most people walk out of prison thinking I'm not eligible for anything, and that's not true. But the question I ask is, how could I have gone through all that time with all those meetings with case managers and not had one conversation at any point saying, Augie, have you thought about what you'd like to do so that you can get gainfully employed? Because I can give you some resources that you can follow up with. And so to me, that kind of tells a state of what prisons are, is they just keep
Yeah.
people occupied while the clock runs until it's time that they're released, and then they become somebody else's issue.
Now that raises a couple concerns for me hearing you describe it that way. Now, on the one hand, people would say, well, I don't give a damn what what kind of hardship there is in prison. I mean, they did the crime, they need to do the time. They don't need to be getting educated and being able to come out and be successful. But that doesn't land right for me, because on the one hand, you could say prison is a warehouse, like you're saying, so that the society is safer. Hey, this person is somewhat of a threat, right? Because they committed a crime, or they hurt somebody, or they cheated somebody. But at the same time, if we don't help them transition, I don't feel safe when that person comes back out. And I'm sure the rate of recidivism is higher, which means that people are more likely to commit a crime if they don't have the tools to adjust and adapt and succeed on some level when they re-enter, right?
You're exactly right. So I get the first perspective. I do. They
Right.
did the crime, they should do the time. And so I did the time. But the reality is that it's over 95% of everybody that's incarcerated. And right now in this country, between state, federal, and local jails, there's more than 2 million people incarcerated right this minute.
And
90
it's more,
more than,
right, when you consider people on probation or,
yeah, when you consider probation and parole, it's 7.5 million.
my
But
God.
if you take just those that are incarcerated today, 95% are going to be released. So we're coming back to the community. So the question that I have is, wouldn't it be better if we came back to the community, able to get a job, to live our lives, to pay our bills, to be responsible citizens? And so while I get the fact that, why should my tax dollars, be used to help somebody who's locked up get an education, or get training on how to be something, the reality is that, you know, I I mean, you could be standing next to me, well, now 6 feet away for social distancing, but in the
Right.
line at the grocery store, there's nothing on my chest that says, big red letter that I was incarcerated. I might be sitting next to you in a restaurant, or we could be on the same pickup basketball game, right? So the
Mhm.
point is that, doesn't it make sense from a societal perspective for people to come out and conform to what society expects, meaning that I'll get a job, I'll take care of my financial responsibilities, my family responsibilities? Doesn't that make more sense than have somebody walk out with nothing and then revert to crime because, you know there has to be a place
There's
to
no
there has
path
to be food,
forward.
nothing, right?
Right.
And so from that standpoint, I think that any money spent is really an investment in not only the person but in society, because if I do get
In
out and I
society,
get
right?
back on my feet and start paying my taxes, there's the repayment of the
Right.
investment.
I don't think your average American feels good knowing that 7, 8 million people are in the criminal justice system in some capacity, right? More people are incarcerated in our country than any other country on earth. And that's in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. I don't think people are proud of that. And so when we say, you got to do the time. Well, what is criminal justice mean to people? If someone's done the time, do we still want this psychological baggage? Like you're saying, no, I don't have this mark on me that says I was imprisoned. But when you get no tools to transition, you carry these psychological chains, like I can't fit in, I can't, you know. So I guess where I'm going with this is, now what are some of those barriers that maybe aren't obvious to the public? Like, do people come out and have a driver's license? How do they even get to a job? And do they have a car? And if they don't have any of these things,
Right.
what's likely to happen?
I mean, One of the things that we do, but based upon the job that I have working with Above and Beyond, is that we give bus passes. It's one of those things that previously I would have taken for granted, right?
Hmm.
So there's a job interview here, just go to the job interview, take the bus. And if the person looks at you and says, I don't have bus fare, and so it's fundamental stuff like that. I can get you a job interview, but the barrier is being able to get to the interview. We've got a closet filled with clothing so that you can look appropriate for a job interview. But people that really haven't been exposed to this might not realize. They might think anybody can open their closet and find a nice shirt and a nice pair of pants and nice shoes to put on for a job interview. But if people don't have, they don't have. And so being able to address some of those things, I share openly, and I never had an issue until I was released, but I struggle with social anxiety. And so I'm comfortable. You put me in front of a group of people. I spoke to 400 people in October at a recidivism event, right? And I'm comfortable because I feel like I'm in my comfort zone as far as what I'm talking about.
Because
But
you're passionate about this. Yeah.
put me in a room with 8 strangers. I assure you, I'll be the last one to talk. I just won't get comfortable. And so when I talk to employers, you know, I tell them that when I first got back to Chicago and got to the halfway house, I was working in the west suburbs, and the halfway house is in the city. So every morning I would go to merge onto the Eisenhower, and I would really struggle. Now, before I went away, I had driven for whatever it was, 30 years and probably a million miles. But coming down that ramp to get up to the right speed to be able to merge in with traffic, I really struggled. It created anxiety for me. When it was the end of the day and I was time to come back at 3 o'clock, I'm starting to think about at 5 o'clock, I've got to get back in the car and drive down that ramp. But I tell employers the thing was that once I got into the flow of traffic, I drove just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And all I needed was somebody at the bottom of the ramp to be a little bit patient with me, just a little bit, so I could just fit in there. And I use that as a way to explain to employers that it wasn't forever. Now I have no problem going on and off expressways, right? So, and it's not just for employers; it's for people that are working with or associating with those that have been away. And by the way, it's not just incarceration; it's people that are coming out of a lot of different issues, right? It's
Right.
returning military. I mean, it's about we just need to be a little patient with each other because once I figure it out, I'll be okay. I'll make it work. But in the beginning, it was really a struggle. But I still have that social anxiety thing, and I have no idea how long that's going to persist. I think I make strides regularly, but I'm not where I feel I should be. I'm certainly not where I feel I was before I went away.
So there's little things like that. And you had mentioned to me before that, let's say somebody's car was parked somewhere when they're arrested or when they're picked up, and it's it's got to be dealt with for 10 years or something like that. A person could come out with a mountain of parking fees
Yes.
or lot fees from being towed and impounded, and then you can't get your license until and it's like there's just so many obstacles sometimes, and in some cases it's probably like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to ever solve all of this. So it makes recidivism,
So
a logical choice for them.
how about child support, right?
Hmm.
So a person that's incarcerated that has child support, they are it's not possible they can make those payments. They're right. So I'm not lobbying that those should be forgiven, but they need to be deferred till release. So if it's a 2-year sentence, in 2 years I'll start making my payments. But if a person doesn't file the appropriate paperwork to defer everything, the meter keeps running, the interest keeps running. So now you get out, want to get back to work, and you go to the DMV to renew your driver's license, and they say, well, we can't give you a driver's license. You've got all this child support that you owe. So my question is, why wouldn't that information be made available to somebody as they're walking into the prison system? If you have child support, you need to file something where you take responsibility that I'm going to pay this upon my release, but that then freezes the window of this interest that's accumulating. And so when you walk out, you can get your license so you can go to work, so that you can get back into the economic mainstream.
And actually make those payments.
Yes.
Right. So what sort of things do you put into your program then that maybe would not be obvious to someone like me or to the average citizen?
I think that, the most recent one I have is called Keeping It Real, A Path to Reentry. So that's based upon actually walking down that path, walking out that door of prison and what it's like to move forward, and spend a lot of time, talking about different challenges and in some cases barriers, and developing a plan to deal with those things. And one of the things that I talk about as we do the material is we always need a plan B, and sometimes even a plan C. So an example is I go back to, I had a successful company that hung drywall, whatever. And I go away for a few years. And while I was away, my brother-in-law ran my company for me. But when I go back, I'm going to take my company back over and move on. And I get to the halfway house, and the case manager at the halfway house says, "Do you have a job lined up?" "Well, I've got a drywall company I'm going to take over." "Oh, no, you're not. When you're in the halfway house, you can't work for yourself." "Oh, that's okay. My brother-in-law's running. I'll just work for him." "Oh, no, you can't. You can't work for a family member." And so there was your plan A. I'm going to go to work and do what I've always done, hanging drywall. There's my plan A. If I don't have a plan B, when that rug gets pulled out from under me because of the rules, which I understand the rules are what they are, and I have no choice but to deal with it. If I don't have a plan B, now what? Now I'm left scrambling. I don't know how I'm going to move forward. So, a lot of what we cover, we spend a lot of time on communication, spend a lot of time on being able to tell our story. If I'm going to sit in front of you and you're a potential employer, this is my opinion, and I share it with the groups that I work with to say that, they're going to find out anyway. They're going to Google our name, and they're going to find an article in the Tribune or the Sun Times or somewhere that says that we were arrested. One guy was, this was with a group that was in halfway house, and he said, "No." And so he took his phone, he punched his name in, and the first thing came up was his mug shot from Cook County Jail. And I said, so if I'm your potential employer, that's the first thing I'm going to see. So why don't we put ourselves in a position to tell our story? To say, I've made some mistakes, here's what I did, and here's how I have, and I'm trying to change my life. So I think there's some real stuff. It also then forms the framework of, in a job interview, me being able to express my shortcomings, to put me in a very honest and real light as to, I'm just looking for an opportunity to demonstrate that I'll be an asset to the company, and I'll come every day and do the job that's required of me, and so on and so forth.
How many people have you helped in this program that you developed?
Over the years, I'm sure that it's got to be closing in on between 1,500 and 2,000.
Wow.
And it's kind of neat. I've got some emails that I cherish, and some letters that I got from guys that I instructed. We were co-inmates. I mean, and they got out, and they've sent me stuff. Or since I've been out, I've gotten emails. Guys that have gone on, they're married, they have kids, they're doing great, they've got their own company, or they're working for a company and doing real well, and they've managed to put all this in the rearview mirror. And in their letters, they were, it moved me that they said, the program that we worked together, what we went through with the plan, is really what's kept me centered. One guy wrote me and said, "I continue to do the goal setting sheets every year." And so it's a feeling that I really can't express with words. But yeah, it's been a couple thousand, and the reason that I'm hopeful of what's going to happen with having it on the tablet is that, it's reasonable within the first year my material will be in front of 300,000-400,000 people. And so now I'm working to try to, I've been talking with people about developing an app which will provide support immediately upon release for services to help with housing, help with employment, help with support groups, and those type of things.
That's amazing. And yeah, I think we're a better society if we have people that understand the system the way you do. And when I think about criminal justice, I mean, I think on the one hand, it's about protecting society. That's why we have prisons and incarceration. I think, secondly, we probably want it to be some kind of deterrent. If it was something that wasn't really a bad deal, then that might not be disincentivized to commit crime. But I don't think that means that we want people to do their time and then really not be done with their time. You know, if you've done your time, we also got to keep society safe by having a real path to be a better citizen. And I think that's where your plan, your program comes in, and that's why it resonated with me. It seemed like it's ultimately a win-win for society. And so I was definitely open to talking with you here today and to continue the conversation. So, where can people find the work that you're doing with this program you've developed, and how could they learn more or support what you're doing?
So, a couple of things. I was actually encouraged. I was introduced to a publishing lawyer, and I'm finishing up a book. And I tell people it's not a prison tell all. This is not a bunch of stories of, hey, this is what happened. It's really about my journey, but in a way that can be relatable to anybody who's going through this. And so it's written about in a way to bring benefit to somebody who's presently incarcerated or right when they get out, and family members of those that say, okay, my husband, my brother, my cousin, my son's coming home. How can I best support them in order to help them get back to where they need to be? And then the second part of the book is really talking about how we might be able to do things better as a society. It's not a criticism of anything. It's saying that employers certainly play a major role in this. So if you're an employer and you could see it as a good business decision to hire people that have backgrounds to give them an opportunity. If you're involved in a nonprofit agency and you could help people to find some stable housing and so on and so forth. So I'm kind of excited that I think it can help people, and I want to find a way to get it in the hands of the men and women that are currently incarcerated as a way to maybe bring some hope to say this, this will move forward, especially if I can figure out how to get it to lead into an app that will provide actual tangible contacts to move forward. But people can reach out to me. My email address is Augie at secondop.com. And hopefully in what you put up, we can have it
Yeah,
all.
I'll include any other links if there's a website.
There's a website, which is secondop.com. I have a pretty active LinkedIn page, which is under my name. I post on there fairly regular. I haven't done much since the start of everything that's gone on this year, but I post fairly regular some of the really neat stories and experiences and with the people that I encounter. And so I think that I'm always willing to talk to people. I ask that you put my phone number on there, and anybody that wants to say, hey, how can I get involved in this? There's always a way. There's always a way to bring benefit to somebody that really is just in need of that next step.
Yeah. Do you have a title yet for the book, or do we got to wait
I
for the?
do. I do, as a matter of fact. So it's I climbed the wrong mountain to discover the right path.
Wow.
And so all of my programs, as this has come together, they now have the word path in them, right?
Hmm.
A path to effective communication, a path to reentry, and so on and so forth. But it really is my story, in a very short way. It's probably a long title, but I was on the mountain climbing, chasing money,
It's a
and
powerful visual, though. I,
and
I I like
that
it.
was the wrong place to be. But once I realized that I was climbing the wrong mountain, I found a path that I feel like I'm doing something that has real purpose.
You're on your authentic path, Augie.
I believe
And
so, and thank you for saying that,
yeah,
Todd.
and when you mentioned that part about including in your book some things that society could could be mindful of to improve this situation overall. It reminds me of some research that was reported on by a journalist named Johan Hari, who was investigating the rates of opiate addiction in Portugal. They were off the charts. Almost 1% of the society had a heroin problem, and the government turned to psychologists and other scientists for suggestions. And they said, you know what? Only thing that's going to work here to curb this serious crisis is to reinvest the money that was going to criminalizing the addiction and put that into a program for rehabilitation and reducing stigma. And so they started creating aid and funds to support companies and businesses that could give work to people coming out of these programs. Hey, you know what? We can pay half of the salary to incentivize you to give this person a chance. And when the stigma came down and it was decriminalized, the numbers went dramatically down. And I think that we could probably, so there's a precedent for this. And I think with some of the ideas that you have about helping people make this transition, we might be able to aspire to a society where we're not incarcerating millions and millions of people. It's a tragedy of our great nation. So I appreciate your story. I hope others do as well. I'm open-minded about everything that you're sharing. I try to be open-minded about everything that I investigate in psychology, in art, in spirituality. And so in this series of video dialogues, I want to be able to show people new sides of life that maybe they haven't really thought deeply about or haven't been exposed to. So I'm grateful to you for that, and I hope we can do it again, Augie. And thank you for the work you're doing in our great city right now in Chicago for the vulnerable homeless population and those in need during this pandemic crisis. Hopefully, there are brighter days ahead.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to have this dialogue with you, and I would look forward to maybe when we come out on the other side to visit again and talk about how, because I do think that we are going to be facing, a new norm after this, and so one of the concerns I have is that the populations that I work with, the population that I'm a part of, when 30 million people rush back to work, I have concern that this population will be on the outside looking in and kind of the last wave that gets settled back in. So there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that there's a pathway post COVID. So
All right. Till next time. Thank you, Augie.
thank you, Todd. Take care.
You too.